Good evening, welcome to the special work session council meeting of December 7th. We do have a quorum. Public forum, individuals may address the city council about items not included in the agenda. Speakers are required to state their name and address for council record and limit the remarks to 3 minutes or less. Speakers are requested to frame their comments around items that fall within the authority of the city council. Generally, the city council will not take official action on the item discussed at this time, but may place the item on file, take the matter under advisement, refer the matter to staff or a committee for future report, or direct the matter to be placed on the upcoming agenda. Does anyone wish to speak?
Lois Machi, 13834 179th Street. Thank you for getting the microphone. On behalf of the Friends of Hurley Hall, I express my gratefulness in having the opportunity to briefly speak to you. At the November 16th planning meeting, our group submitted a written request for a short written status of any Hurley Hall review by Thanksgiving. Although Lori Casella briefly told me that Sister Beaton has not yet submitted anything for a normal review, we have not yet received a short written answer that we would look forward to receiving for our record so that we have something on file. We sincerely hope that the proposed project is reviewed in compliance with the local code. Preservationists, along with our group members, believe that Hurley Hall would make an excellent candidate for needed housing and/or other uses. Available programs are stronger now than at any time that the Buckman Building or the Academy of Holy Angels rehabilitations took place. Hundreds of religious organizations nationwide have been able to help ensure this future, prevent cultural resources from being permanently lost, and bring in considerable local revenue and jobs through the use of these programs, either by themselves, in partnerships, or through other new property owners. I thank you for allowing me to have the opportunity to express my concerns about the future of the Franciscan Sisters and the Morrison County area. Thank you very much, and again, thank you for the microphone. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak?
It's December 7th, and there are still no fully accessible bathrooms, no architectural drawings, no plans to date to allow everyone, not just some, to enter those bathrooms. Why haven't we seen the plans to modify them? There was money stated by this group in the budget for the bathrooms in 2015. I implore the city to do that. From the December 1st, 2014 special work session, I requested that I wanted the city to place a banner at City Hall stating, "We support ending all United States foreign wars of aggression." An entire year has passed, and I still have not even received a response. That's really not very mannerly or professional. I formally request again tonight to have my seasonal display on city property. And I request to be heard tonight when you discuss the policy on displays on city public property, since I requested to be on the agenda formally in writing. I oppose the mayor's proclamation on law enforcement and question his timing. Why now? Why now, Mr. Mayor? What prompted you? After I put the mayor's law enforcement proclamation on my blog and all over social media, it garnered these comments from the wider community. From Michelle Gross, president of Communities United Against Police Brutality and 25-year activist in the Twin Cities area. Quote, "That statement is utterly asinine, given the wide evidence of crimes by police, not to mention the false inflation of risk of policing. That mayor must be trying to ensure his re-election by sucking up to the local police union." From friend Walker, well, this quote, well, it is Little Falls, unquote. From an attorney, quote, weird, unquote. From a peace officer in Minnesota of 9 years and a Minnesota law enforcement instructor of 30 years, quote, if the mechanics were killing unarmed citizens, would he write a proclamation for them too? For history's sake, for those of you who weren't in the council, and to refresh the memory of those who are still on the council, I received a letter dated January 23rd, 2012 from Lori Casella, where I requested having signs in a public park. Her response was the city parks are open to the public, however, section 10.20 of the city code does not allow overnight camping, nor for
Time's up, Robin,
signs
thank you.
to be placed in parks.
Anyone else wish to speak? Hearing none, we'll move on to regular council items. Award sale bond, public improvements. Lori?
Yes, bids were open today on the bonds for the public improvements for the 2015 petition projects. We had 5 bids on the bonds, and the low bid was from United Bankers Bank at 2.48%. The preliminary, when we had gone out for bonding, we anticipated the rates would be about 2.76. So we're just about 30 basis points less than what we had anticipated. So that's good news.
Any questions for Lori on that one? Hearing none, we'll move on then to garbage fees, city sanitary or disposal. Lori or John, when you get to one?
You want to start?
Sure. We have a contract with City Sanitary and Otrumba Disposal to do the garbage and the recycling. And in their contract, it indicates that their rates go up or down based on the CPI, whatever the Consumer Price Index does for the previous year. So the haulers were in knowing that the CPI was going to go down and asked if the city would consider leaving the rate at what it was rather than decrease it based on the CPI. I told them, I don't have that authority, we don't have that authority, it would have to go back to the council for any type of action. The CPI over the last year has gone down, I believe it was about 8.4% is what it went down, which would make their fee go from, right now the garbage drive-by fee is $7.16, so it would go down to $6.56. And the recycling drive-by fee is $3.22, and it would go down to $2.95. So I told them, I said, if they're interested in, making that request to the council, that they needed to send a letter indicating that they would like the fee to stay the same and why. And I believe a copy of that letter is included in your packet.
So over history, we've given them increases, correct?
Yes, we've given them increases.
When the CPI goes up.
When the CPI goes up. In the old contract, and this is several years ago, if I remember correctly, it addressed when the CPI went up, but it didn't address when the CPI went down. So what we did in years past before this last contract is if the CPI went down, the rates stayed the same, but then any increase was based on the lower rate or the base rate, not the rate that was being billed.
So if it went up next year, it would go up from the lower number.
Correct. In this contract, we specifically put in there that the change would be any increase or decrease in the CPI.
Have they ever asked not to go up as much as the CPI went up?
Pardon?
Have they ever asked not to have as big of an increase as the CPI?
No.
When I look at it, contract's contract. You're out there, you'll take the benefits, but you don't take the falls on it. Not much in favor on that, so I would vote against that.
So they also, in the resolution tonight, in the utility rate resolution, we are suggesting an increase in the bag fee, the per bag fee. They'll have brought in their invoices in which we've calculated the cost of the bags, and the cost of the bags have gone up. So it would go from $1.38 to $1.42 a bag, or from $13.80 to $14.20. So they'll get, 40 cents on a pack of 10 bags.
Any comments from anyone else? Leave it, drop it?
Is the garbage contract up this year? I mean, 2016?
At the end of
And at the end of
2016,
16.
December of 16, yeah.
Well, I know they're in the business to be profitable, and I hate to see them not be profitable, but my guess is when we renegotiate a new contract that there'll be adjustments made to either cover this or, I agree with Frank. It's sad, but I mentioned to someone that it almost feels to me like the NFL where if they sign a contract and they hold out because they think they overperformed and they deserve more money, but if they underperform, they don't offer it back. And I know that's a bad analogy, but it's hard once a contract is signed to negotiate based on this and this, unless we were to renegotiate when it did go in our favor, when it went more there. I think it's kind of like a pendulum that swings. Sometimes it's in their favor, sometimes it's in ours. I sympathize with them, but I don't know if I'm willing to make a change.
In terms of a budget impact, there really isn't anything, because what we collect is paid back.
Correct.
So,
So it's actually helping residents is what it's doing.
yep, biggest beneficiary will be the residents.
If we don't change it,
If we do,
if we do change it.
it's gonna be a
If
benefit.
we stay to the contract, we'll
Right.
benefit the residents.
Community by 70 cents a month or whatever. So that's in the regular agenda,
Correct, it's in the resolution with the water and sewer rates, water, sewer, garbage, and recycling rate.
and it's in there as to follow
The
the CPI.
lower rate, the lower rate, yeah.
Okay. Direct staff to create a policy for displays on city property. John?
Yes, this is in response to the request that came in, and discussing it with our city attorney and other advisements. We wanted to see if there was any input from the council in terms of creation of that policy and or not allowing for that to take place. So, Tony, did you have some input to?
Well, yeah, I mean, understand if you're going to do this and set a policy on it, particularly given the recent Supreme Court decisions, in order to do this fairly and under the law, you can only regulate basically time, place, and manner. So, if you're thinking you're gonna have some ability, if you allow displays or signage on city property, that you're gonna be able to somehow control beyond size, how long it can be there, lighting type things, that's incorrect then. So understand, if you're gonna create a policy, it'll basically be, here's what you need to do to apply, here's how big you can have something, here's the square footage, here's the height, lighting or non-lighting, things like that, but you could not in any way, shape, or form regulate content. That's the only way you could establish a policy that would be fair and consistent with the law. And I don't know that the council is gonna wanna open up, their city parks, their city property, given that lax standard, and that seems to be the trend that the Supreme Court is going to. So, either you're gonna do that and have a very bland, wide open policy for what people can put on city property, and that goes across the board for anybody who asks, or you're gonna say, we aren't going to do it, and that goes across the board. Right now you have, as far as displays, you have the Lions with a holiday display. I'm hearing Ms. Hensel say that she wants to put up a display. So the question is what are we gonna do with all of this? And so, you know, you have to decide, are we going to allow it? And then we go from there as far as, okay, here's the wide open policy on that, or no, we're not going to allow it at all across the board. Now, the Lions display is already up. If Ms. Hensel has made an application, you know, then I think she needs to be directed to staff, work with staff so that she's allowed to display up until whatever time, if you decide to terminate it, that it is terminated across the board, and then she's allowed to display under the, you know, for right now, we don't have a policy, but at least under the same terms, conditions, restrictions that we have afforded the Lions. And then if you decide we're going to do that from here on out, you need to set a very standard, again, generic policy as far as size, time, place. If you're not, then you need to set a deadline for, okay, as of whatever date, January 1st, February 1st, July 1st, whatever you put, we're no longer gonna allow displays, because, you know, to do so, we have to be so wide open about it that we have virtually no control over our own property. So, you know, as far as that goes at this point in time, you know, until you make a decision about do we or don't we want to do it, and if you don't want to do it, you set a deadline for stopping, you know, at least we've got the Lindbergh Lions display out there. I think we gave them until February 1st. And you've got a request from Ms. Hensel that I think then if we're going to allow that to stand, you need to allow her comparable accommodations in that regard. You know, you, just like with the Lions, you set, you know, we dictate where that's going to be allowed, and it's consistent with size of what's allowed with the Lions and whatnot, but I think that, you know, it's one or the other. Either you set a policy and then everybody is allowed to apply. Everybody is allowed to put signage out, and it'll basically be, you know, saying whatever those entities or whatever those people want, or you across the board say we're not going to allow it anymore. Here's our cutoff date, and then nobody's allowed to put displays on city property. So those are kind of your two options.
Tony, is there a difference if it's like the Lions or a civic organization supporting local business?
It is not under the law. No, it is not under the law. Everybody, you know, is afforded free access.
Whether a private person or a group, doesn't matter.
Nope, doesn't matter.
Tony, also, if we would adopt a policy for this, you know, would you have a lottery for all the properties that we have? And then, because in fairness,
Great.
so we'd be juggling that. We'd be juggling, okay, what happens when you run out of equal parts of land?
Right.
And so to monitor it and to allow it and fairly give it to everyone would be nearly impossible.
It would be, because think about it. I mean, you don't have an equal number of parks that are of equal size. You don't have parks with the same visibility. There are all sorts of differences. We're right, and now you've opened it up, and now you're trying to accommodate all these different requests, you know, with all these different variables. I just think trying to do that and to do it right and to do it fairly is going to be nearly impossible. And because of that, I'm going to recommend you don't do it, because, and across the board, nobody gets it then. Because I don't think you can do it the other way. You can scrap it fairly across the board without having to address a million variables that I don't think we can ever adequately accommodate.
So we would have staff meet with the person that requested and address, that would be one option, and address that, find a location for it.
Yep.
And then set the deadline when it has to come down. And then we could, in the same motion or in a different time, say from here on in, we will not allow
Right, I think like with.
And those are just options. actually.
Right, I mean, like
That's
with Ms. Hensel, I think she's made it clear, she's made the request. I don't know in what form, in what fashion, whatever. But she's made the request, we have granted it for another request. So I think staff needs to work with her again to work out something comparable. You know, she doesn't get more than Lions, but she doesn't get less than what they have been afforded. And again, it's not gonna be in the same spot, we can't do that, but we have to find something comparable in another park, in that regard, for right now, but, you know, and for anybody that would ask, up until whenever you say no more. And so you, I think as a council, if you're gonna decide, we just can't do this fairly, it's gonna be a nightmare, and we just aren't gonna do it, you need to set a deadline then. And after that deadline, nobody gets to put anything on city property.
I'd say there was one more requirement that they had for the Lions was that it was all going up at their expense, and they were gonna pay for any sort of utility costs, electricity, anything that was being utilized on the property that was being billed back to the city, that they would reimburse the city for that cost.
And that'd be consistent.
Well, the city didn't help put it up, just for utilities, is what they're reimbursing the city for, not for labor.
And the deadline for them taking that down is February?
That's the one that was approved back in March.
So the tram can't put any display out there. Arts and crafts can't put a display. So if we deny that, we're shutting down other things also for fairness.
Right?
And we have to be fair,
Yeah.
so.
The display, but that doesn't address usage.
Right, usage and display are different, but you're gonna need to decide the same thing.
The display for Lindbergh is in an area that's been then closed off of the park, that there's no access to anybody to utilize that section of the park, of the city property. If, in being consistent, you would have the same thing. You would allow for a designated area of the park, and that whole section's closed up while the display is erected.
Now, could you have each park, you take into consideration size, setbacks and everything? Maybe some parks could have a smaller area and have that all, in other parks, larger areas.
Sure, you could do that, but then the question is, who gets what parcels? And when?
First
And
come,
in what,
first served
you know,
basis.
and then.
You can't do that
and
when you're out, then what do you do?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I see where you're coming from.
yeah. I mean, there will be a million variables that would need to be addressed to make sure that everybody is receiving the same treatment, to the point where I think it's almost impossible to do here.
Administratively, we would have
It would be a
a very
nightmare.
difficult time managing every available area of property. And then it's not, while it has the display, the park is closed, and then it's not used for its public use.
So we have to look at fairness versus anything else on this one. And if the only fair thing we can do is not allow it in any park, that's the road we have to travel.
But also we need to address the request.
Well, I think by allowing the Lions at this point, we have to do what's fair there too.
But we'll have to put that on the regular agenda.
Well, I think you put it on the regular agenda, for basically, what I would say, given the date that we're at, would be approval for it, and then that staff needs to, get working on it immediately so that those things can get put up. Because if you wait till the next meeting, we're already, 3/4 of the way through December. So I think you approve it today where it's allowed, because that's always been the factor, city has to approve it, and then Ms. Hensel would simply need to work with staff, and staff would need to figure out what if we afforded Limerick Lions and get her set up with that. Then that's how I think you need to approach it for today.
Now, are we addressing city property or just the parks here?
Well,
for right now, Le Bourget, they have it in a park, so right, I mean, that's,
Park
you,
for
you, you
park.
don't, you,
Yeah,
you set the parameters for location, things like that. They're in a park, so right, I mean,
Well, like,
that,
we can have it sitting, no decoration sitting out at City Hall.
no,
If
that's
that's,
the point I'm
Right.
trying to
yeah,
get at.
no,
so,
Park.
we don't have to allow that either.
No.
We got parks.
Okay.
right, yeah.
Or else we'll have the Lions coming back saying, well, you stuck us in a park,
Right,
somebody's using City Hall, why can't we use City Hall? Now we need more time at City Hall.
and these
Yeah.
are all the
Yeah.
reasons to set
Yeah.
a deadline, in my opinion, and not do this anymore. But for now, to be fair, I think, you know, we've done it for the Lions, we need to be fair about this and give, similar, comparable accommodations, to Ms. Hensel then too.
Does her current request have a location?
I
Specific?
have no idea.
City property was what was
Is that it?
defined in the request.
And we can limit it to city park property.
Yeah,
Okay,
yes.
that's
Yeah.
good.
You know, the other thing is depending upon, they have a pretty big display over there. So again, to be comparable and fair, if she's gonna want one that size, you know, we need to find do we have a property that big? I don't know if we do or not.
Mill Street
Mill-
Park.
Mill-
We're looking at putting this on the current agenda?
If we're gonna act on it, we have to, yeah.
Okay. Well, Robin's here. Do you have a spot in mind?
Well, there are complicating factors now that we're this late into the season. Remember that my request was made the middle of November when the ground was still not frozen. It is now. And I am disabled, I'm going to have to line up help to drive in poles, and I don't think it's possible anymore now because of the freezing. And the request that was made, actually,
So Robin, do you have a
I,
place in mind?
I don't know where I could do that, where there might be trees or some other poles or something I could use that's already up to be able to affix what I want to affix to anything. I'm limited in what I can do physically, and I don't think there is a park where there are poles or something that I might be able to attach anything to. So I need those kind of questions answered. But you guys allowed the Lindbergh Lions to install their display while it was in violation of the sign ordinance. They did not have permission from you guys, and they did it in a time frame when they could drive the poles in for support before the snow came. I'm not in that same situation, so I don't have an answer at this point.
Well, they did request this last time for a specific spot. It would be nice to know in your request if you had a spot in mind, because it's hard to give out something if you don't even know where it's at.
Right.
And this
That's what I'm
was-
saying.
Yeah.
To me, it seems like we have room with the amount of requests we're gonna get for displays. As it looks now, we have the space. My guess is after Robbins, we're not gonna get another one. You know, if we do, we'll have to address it, and then by next year, we can just scrap the whole idea.
And
Or you scrap it January 1.
the ground isn't that froze yet. You could put stakes down.
I dug fence posts on Saturday, so.
Yeah, it's possible, yeah, it's not even froze that deep, so. Anyway,
What about the possibility of mixing mine in with the La Verger, the Lions now?
I think that would depend on them if they're willing to do something like that. I don't see.
Well, using the north end of Le Bourget, because they ain't using all Le Bourget, correct?
Yeah, it's not entirely utilized. But where they're, I mean,
And
where
Labor-
their section, it is roped off, closed, no trespassing sign up there. I mean, it's not in violation of the current sign ordinance now.
And Le Bourget is not being utilized during the winter months. I don't see anyone out there skiing or doing anything like that, so.
May I just add something else, and that is that I wouldn't be using lights. Don't need that kind of a source, and no electricity. And I would also ask for being afforded the protection of something like that closing off so that people going in there and trying to do damage or even encroaching on the property could be arrested, because I don't want my stuff being damaged. Same as Lindbergh
Greg,
Lions.
are those ropes up on our part, or the city putting those up, or
We did not put those up, Lions put those up.
Lions put those up? So they've installed everything that's located
Everything's
there.
over there, they installed all of it.
They even paid for upgrading of electrical services for the lighting.
That is correct, yeah.
It's kind of hard for us to give an okay right now when we don't even know where the request is being made for. That was the point I was trying to make earlier.
No, I'm with you.
Yeah,
I'm prepared to vote for it, let her have her display, but where?
Well, I think that's the point of, you vote to allow it and approve it, and then you direct that staff work with her, and staff works through, where do you want, how big do you want it? And then, okay, here are the options, you know, that you can pick from, pick your spot, and go from there. And
I think that's probably.
That-
Thing
that's-
is, until you leave it up to staff, so then
Right.
she's not satisfied with where one and then it's to the other one, or
They-
is it
they-
just up to?
they can talk with her and figure out what she's looking at and give suggestions, where here are your options. This location, or this location, which one do you want? And then she's responsible to put it up, to take it down. You know, it's basically the same as with the Lions.
As long as we're fair with
Yep.
the amount of space.
Yep.
And as long as we address it ASAP.
Yep, exactly.
So that she can get it out there.
Yep.
So do we want to have,
Add it to the regular agenda?
on the regular agenda, do we want to
Anybody
have one item?
Concerns, questions before we add it?
Two, or?
Might as well put it on.
Greg, just out of curiosity, do you get many complaints or anything over at the Lindbergh Lions as far as vandalism or anything with theirs, or you guys don't place it 5 times a night, drive by, check it out? It's,
I know the guys drive by,
right,
they keep an eye on it.
right, so they're in the area, if that's, she so chooses,
Yep,
North Labor J or whatever,
yep, as long as it has, do it
anything else.
Then we should put a takedown date in that.
If we're gonna,
Yeah, with the Lions.
Right, as part of addressing it on the agenda, you should indicate, are you gonna form a policy? Or are you not gonna form a policy and you're going to set a deadline date for when there are no longer displays on city property?
Well, right now, the Lions have until February 1st.
So, you
If
know,
we
you
so
might,
choose, or we change it to
February
January
1st
1st?
after, what?
Or we change it to January 1st?
You
So,
said-
why can't we?
You do that.
you do that. That's up to you for what date you wanna set, that's up to you.
Who cares?
I think we have this discussion.
I think the request of January 1st to begin with, and we give them to February 1st just for weather cooperation.
It's a holiday and that falls on
Friday.
Friday.
I think actually requested like the 5th or 6th or something like that to give them time to take it down.
Well, I
Then
would-
you
I
have
would-
to
I
go
would say
fairness
that-
for length of time. The Lions had theirs up.
No, we go fairness to a deadline and everything is done,
Right, you
which the
set
first of the
the
year would
deadline.
be.
Okay.
That's- Set the deadline, yeah.
There's nothing after that.
January 15th or whatever, or February 1st, it don't, whatever. You gotta leave it going the next year or end at the end of the year.
Well, let's see. I'd say the 15th of January, and that's close enough. Split the difference between the first and the first.
So we got new business,
January 10th is a Sunday.
the 10th. So give them the midnight on the 10th, or what? That's fine with me.
Where is that? Aye.
That'll be high under new business. Okay. John?
All right.
Water and sewer rates?
Yes. For those of you sitting on the right, if you wanted to move your chairs around to the other side or just turn them around where you're at. As we discussed at the last that budget planning meeting, we got some major expenses coming up in our capital improvement plan for both water and wastewater. So we are investigating, looking at the rates for both of those funds into trying to identify enough revenue so that we're ensuring that we have adequate dollars in those funds to operate. So currently there are improvement funds tied to each of those funds. The water has about $1.6 million in that improvement fund. The sewer has about $1.1 million. Within the next 6 years for both funds, we're looking at $10 million of improvements at least at the water plant. And rough estimate now, and this could very well change a lot come when we get the feasibility reports back, but about $11 million worth of improvements with the sewer treatment facilities. So, as you can see, we're looking at various means of financing those projects, whether through debt service, bonding, getting onto the Public Facilities Authority priorities list, which is probably as David John presented at the last meeting, your best for lowest interest rates. In terms of grant dollars, those really are going to be based on need factors, and we're probably not going to qualify for the need factors with the rates currently where they are and the funds operating as they would be today, but maybe some things would change over the next 5 years. So, there's really, in my mind, there's really two revenue streams that water and sewer funds are going to operate with. There's going to be a base charge that everybody is charged a flat rate every month, and that's going to be consistent for the number of users throughout the system. Currently, that base rate's $12.65 per user account, regardless of if they have an 8-inch meter, a 1-inch meter, a 2-inch meter, or a 5/8-inch meter that most residential properties have. And then the other items there are multiples for units. So if an apartment complex is, they're charged an individual base charge for every unit in that complex. And then in commercial areas where there's a mixed use, if there's multiple units within that building, say 4 apartments upstairs, and then the commercial use downstairs, they're charged a multiple for that. So we're looking at changing the way we develop this, and this is actually going back similar to where it was back in the 1990s. The city had a rate charge based on meter size. So they had different rates for 1-inch meters, 2-inch meters, 3-inch, and as those sizes increase, they go up by multipliers. So currently what we're proposing, looking at what we have for usage revenues, operating revenues, and then the base charge, let me get this out of the way, the base charge revenue, and then the non-operating revenues. What we want to do is try to match up the usage revenue with the operating expenses so that those usage rates, what people are paying per gallon, get you enough revenue to pay for the operating expenses. That's your salaries, your utility costs, your chemical costs, the things it takes you to get that water treated so you can deliver it to the customer. Your base charge is going to be that flat monthly rate, and the non-operating expenses are going to be the debt service that you have to pay for the utility fund, and then the capital improvements that you're going to make on a given annual basis or over time that you likely are identifying in your capital improvement plan over a 5-year period so that you have time to basically plan out those expenses so you know what those rates are going to be so that you can keep that flat rate to collect enough in the year to pay for those designated things. So where we're currently at and where we have been in 2013-14 is that our usage revenue, and this is very similar in the sewer side, our usage revenue is plenty high to cover the operating expenses, but our base charges are not high enough to cover the non-operating expenses. They're actually quite a bit lower. So what we've been doing is subsidizing the increased money that we get on the usage revenue side to the base charge revenue, and then subsidizing further with improvement fund dollars that we've had set aside in the past for years that were profitable. But now knowing that we have such dramatic increases coming up, there's no way we're going to be able to keep up at the current rate structure to pay for those new improvements, either on an annual basis or if we spread them out over debt service over the 15-year period that we've usually done. So this is the example of what we're looking at for the proposal. I'm sorry for the size, and it's probably a little more difficult to read, but there are copies of this in your packets, and nothing here has changed. So the base meter we have going from the 5 base is a standard meter, and then there's like 2, 3, 4-inch meters, and then there's other meters that are standard size. We look at moving that base rate up to $13.25 per meter, and then creating a multiplier system for every meter from as they get bigger. So we have 1-inch meters, we have 1.5-inch meters, 2, 3, 4. We don't currently have a 5-inch meter or a 6-inch meter in service, but they do exist, so they could be added if people wanted to downsize. And then there's one current account that has an 8-inch meter. So the 2, 3, and 4, there's not a lot of accounts for those. There are a couple hundred for the 1 and the 1.5 inch. So what you do is you would take the 1325 and you multiply it by the multiplying factor. For a 1-inch meter, then that goes to 1988 the first year. 1.5 is 39.75. 2 66.25. 3 is 132.50. 4 is 198.75. 5-inch 265. 6-inch 331.25. And 8-inch is 397.50. So in the first year, this helps us a lot, but it doesn't get us all the way to where we would need to be to pay for all the capital improvements, and it certainly doesn't get us to where we need in years 2 through 6. So we'd have to increase that multiplying factor every year. So in 2017, and this is shown in a later graph, in 2017 the multipliers go up, so there's some increases here. In 2018 they go up again. And then in 2019 is where we would get to, and then that would have us at an adequate revenue stream so that our improvement fund wasn't further subsidizing the cost. And then the revenues, we look at trying to maintain that usage rate for the operating expenses to keep that in the positive as it currently is. So this is a breakdown of over time what that impact would do. And this also plans for raising that base charge by 5% every year. So the 1325 would go up 5% every year. And this would be necessary to maintain that improvement fund balance, the purple lines in the graph, because in the long term, you're going to have to subsidize out of that fund, but you want to build up that enough revenue so that you can sustain that over time. That's going to go up, but then it's going to go down. So then you'd see here the service charge continues on that 5% increase, and eventually the non-operating expenses, the debt service starts to catch up to you, and you don't need to debt service for future projects, but you're going to have an ongoing capital expense every year. So you have that existing debt, you have on top of that your ongoing capital expense. Like in any budgets and projections, there's nothing you can guarantee that in time that these are going to be accurate, but at some point you're going to have to kind of come up with a stabilizing number. And so you can see as the purple line goes up, it then comes down because the green lines start going up in extreme and then they stay flatline. And by 2031, with the 5% increase every year, you're getting to a point where things are, or 2029, you're getting to the point where things are starting to go back up in the improvement fund, and then you can look at stabilizing your rates.
But by then, we're gonna be looking at needing media again,
And that's the capital here, I put in an estimate of $500,000 every year in additional capital expenses with the water treatment plant. So, it's going to be very hard to say that, but this is kind of what you would need to start this trend in operating if you were going to sustain to pay for these upcoming improvements in the next 5 years, and then be able to at least start replenishing those reserves as you spent them afterwards.
Plus whatever the
New costs are going to be
costs
beyond
are,
5 years.
new regulations and
Yes.
all those.
And
kind of
regulations are going to be a huge factor that are going to come up for meeting the permitting limits that NPCA or the federal government are going to set on water treatment.
like Leaf said, 15 years, we're gonna be right back to where we are now. We have to start preparing for them.
Yeah. So this is, if you just stuck with year one, this is where those multiplier numbers come in. If you just stuck at year one, you can see in the first few years you're doing fine, but then it really drops off dramatically. And if you didn't increase it 5%, at no point, or at some point, you're going to be losing money. You'd be negative in your improvement fund. So if you only raised it 2%, that's the blue column, by 2024, our improvement fund would have no money left in it because you'd subsidized everything out of it. So 3%, you get yourself to 2025, 4%, you get yourself to 2026. But at 5%, it does stabilize. That said, there's a whole bunch of other factors that can change things. So this is with the first year multipliers. So then by the time you get to the final year, you get a little bit better terms of stabilizing that. And we also want to maintain this improvement fund at or around this $1 million level too, because it helps in the cash operations of the plant, so that you're never running short of cash to actually operate to help pay your monthly bills. So this is a chart showing the increases with the 5% increase every year for those various meter size charges. So sorry for the large discrepancy in the range of this graph, but you can see for most of your users, this is 75% or more of your users are in the 5/8 or 3/4 inch or your standard meters. Their increase doesn't go up that substantially. They're still under halfway to $50 by the time you get to 30/31. The larger size meters do go up, and they go up pretty dramatically. So we're a 2-inch, at a 5% increase annually, a 2-inch meter by the time this 15 years is up, is going to be up over $200 a year. And then that's for the smaller size meters. Oops. And this is the chart for the larger size meters. You can see the starting range there is $200. Top of the line for an 8-inch meter, and that's only one customer. That's the ethanol plant. They're up over $1,600 a month. It seems like a lot, but those consumptions for these large users, they're going to pay substantially more in a usage rate every single month than they are in the actual base charge. They're going to pay tens and $20,000s of dollars every month in the amount of water they're going to use, versus, which is much higher than what they pay in the usage rate. But in my mind, and what I've seen in other communities, and trying to help us come up with a revenue stream to help pay for these costs, this breakdown for meter sizes and changes is, I think, fair and equitable to make your higher demand water users pay for a large portion of those improvement costs.
So currently they're paying $12.65 just like somebody at a house.
Yep.
And they're getting an 8-inch water
And
main.
then, and our
Bigger than that even.
industrial commercial users are accounting for over 40% of the total water consumed in the city, and that's a few hundred customers. So you have over 2,500 just purely residential customers, and they're only accounting for 33% of the total water used every year. So there's a lot of users, but they're not making up a huge component of what we're sending out to the system to use.
Is there a comparison we can do with other communities?
Yep, I've done a lot of those, and I can show those at a later time. I don't have them ready for me right now. But these rates are actually very much in line in comparison to Marshall, Minnesota, which has a very similar treatment method as we do in a little larger distribution area, but their rates are very comparable to where we're at. We're actually very comparable to what Brainerd's rates are in terms of with that meter size as well. So then in wastewater, and I'll try to, I'll run through this a little bit more. In wastewater, it's very difficult then to make that same argument that the water, that high demand or that meter size really is a huge component of the wastewater size, because industrial users might actually be utilizing that water in the product, and it isn't then going back into the waste stream. So there isn't the same exact correlation. So with the wastewater, we're not looking at making improvements based on the size and consumption. We're just looking at everybody paying a very similar rate in terms of what the wastewater is. And then I was asked to show where we would need to be. I have two graphs, one showing a scaling up of those rates and the other showing just at where we would need to be right away, ready to pay those new capital and existing debt service charges that we have, and those are coming up in the next couple of graphs. They're very similar. We're in that same boat. And even more extreme, where we have very little base charge that we're collecting in revenue for sewer, and it's more than adequately larger components coming from the actual usage charge, what we're billing for on a per gallon basis for people. So we're looking at, in the first year, on a scaled rate, we'd be moving up to $750, and that would get us to a point where we could, with the surplus from the operating revenue, we would be able to at least sustain around that $1 million of operating or improvement fund at that base charge for every customer. So here's that breakdown in sewer. You know, you saw in water, everything was a little bit more equal. You know, the purple lines, if you're comparing those, these are your expenses, and this is your revenue. There's a huge gap between those. But the operating revenue versus the operating expenditures, there's a huge gap on the other side. But, you know, that's in the positive, but eventually those are going to catch up and you're not going to have that surplus as you did before. So here's the breakdown of showing that scaling up of rates. So in a similar fashion, we move things up more, a little steeper, and then by the time you get to the $15 per month per customer, you'd be collecting enough revenue that you'd be balancing out that base charge. And then on the usage side, we looked at it, scaling that up about 2% a year. Currently, we've been at 5% a year, but like I said, we have a surplus of operating revenue versus operating expenditures. Once we get the base revenue to the non-operating expenditures, I call them, the capital improvements and debt service, then you don't need to collect as much surplus because it isn't going back into covering that deficit. So then this is, like I showed before, this is what the improvement fund balance would do in the first few years as you're paying for those existing debt services and improvement and capital improvements. And then by the time you're ready to do your debt service in 2022, you're looking at having a pretty decent improvement fund balance. And you'd have to be collecting enough in revenue to help pay for that new debt service that's coming on after you've expired some of the old debt service. But you have existing debt service in water and sewer out until 2022, so you kind of don't want to push, compound onto that debt that's there. So if you moved it just to $15 flat and then kept it there, you know, the improvement fund balance would build up pretty substantially, pretty quickly. And then by the 2022 time, you'd be flattening out because you have the new debt service coming on. So instead of that, you know, like the previous graph, you dip and then you go back up because you've used the improvement fund balance. Everything starts going up because you're collecting enough to pay for what you already pledged to spend. So that's my spiel for that. We can talk more about the rates and
that fee or that rate scales here you got in there, that's an $11 million improvement.
Yeah.
So if it comes in at a $19 million improvement,
Then you'd have to do some more
We're gonna
planning
take
on the
really
rates, but we'd have well enough advance time warning of that because we're going to be doing facility planning, feasibility studies, and looking at all sorts of different options for how we can treat the wastewater, meet the permits, and do so in the most cost-effective manner for the residents. So.
and doing this will help us get that low interest loans.
Doing this is a very good thing to operate with. It's showing your funds are adequate. The loans are, you know, anybody can really qualify for the loans, and it's the point where the need factors kick in some additional grant dollars. Most of the time, those come at really drastic measures for communities where they have an improvement on a facility that absolutely has to take place immediately. I mean, within a year or next year, or it might fail. You know, here we're trying to have some forethought, but with permitting and regulations, we certainly could be in line for qualifying for that funds if we can't meet the permits and with the existing facilities that we have.
Okay. Any questions for John on that at all? None? Take a couple 2-minute break and back to our regular meeting.